Today we're going to talk about how to fill our lives with optimal experiences. And as the book points out, you can kind of think about how our days are sort of constructed in these small little segments of time. And that some of the time we spend our lives in this sort of mindless pursuit of unchallenging goals that really leaves us feeling really bored or empty. However, if we intentionally search almost moment to moment for these optimal experiences that we'll talk about through meditation and flow, they really give us these emotions of joy and fulfillment. And so as the chapter that we're going to talk about lays out pretty clearly, from at least a positive psychology perspective, a richer life is going to include more novelty, which will be our way of thinking about mindfulness, more absorption, and looking at flow, and attention to the sacred, which at least in this lecture will be minimized. So over the last decade, there has been a tremendous amount of attention that's been paid to mindfulness and mindfulness meditation in particular. It should be noted that mindfulness really was cultivated out of sort of Buddhist traditions, or at least sort of thought about as cultivating awareness in much the exact same way that Buddhist traditions do. Of course, Buddhist traditions have made references to mindfulness for the better part of the last 2,500 years. And so when we really think about how mindfulness integrates into positive psychology, it's a little bit through a Western lens, in that, especially when we look at some of the research by Ellen Langer, that it's not necessarily sort of esoteric or religious or only attainable by certain types of gurus. And so much of the research over the last few years has really demystified sort of the concept of mindfulness. So what is mindfulness? Is it a mind full of things, or is it a mind free of things? Great little cartoon here to help us think about that. So probably the classical definition comes from Jon Kabat-Zinn, and really thinking about these three axioms that are not necessarily separate. They're all sort of interwoven parts of a single process. But again, and most of what we're going to be thinking about today is sort of the present moment. And so is paying attention to the present in a very particular way, to be paying attention to the present sort of on purpose, and in a non-judgmental way. So we talked a little bit back a couple lectures ago how we can sometimes find ourselves paying too much attention to the past or too much attention to the future. And what is an important part of mindfulness is sort of purposeful, non-judgmental attention to the present moment. So if we break this definition down, we're really going to consider intention to mean being on purpose, attention to mean to actually be thinking about the present moment, and that our attitude about the present should be very non-judgmental. Ellen Langer is probably one of the leading psychologists on mindfulness. She brings a very, as she fully admits in many of her lectures, a very Western perspective to what can sometimes feel like a very Eastern idea. And her definition is the one that we're going to probably focus on the most, which is really this idea of having a flexible mind state. And she'll talk about this a lot, which is really this sort of openness to novelty, the sort of search for novelty, the sort of intentional pursuit to look at what is new or novel in your daily life. And it's that process of actually looking for novelty that allows you to become sensitive to when things are changing, helps you sort of stay situated in the present moment, and that's really what she considers mindfulness. And to be mindful, she has really three basic ideas. So one of them is that we have this desire to reduce uncertainty in our daily lives. And so one of the reasons why she thinks that it's important to look at novelty is that it really requires us to overcome this desire to reduce uncertainty in our daily lives. So there are things that are uncertain. There is the future. and those types of thoughts can sometimes bring a certain amount of anxiety, and so we want to reduce that uncertainty. We want to make things predictable, and so part of what she will actually say is that to be mindful, you have to be willing to sort of live in this uncertainty. She did this great study where they actually looked at how people formatted different types of memos, and when they were formatted in a very distinct type of manner, what she found was that most people paid attention to them. And this really gets into the sort of second important part of mindfulness, which is this tendency to engage in automatic behavior or mindlessness, and to really override that idea, to really override this tendency that we all have, this sort of automatic process that we sometimes go through. And so mindfulness really occurs, at least according to Langer, when we become less automatic in our daily behavior. So we've all had these types of situations where we have driven home and we sort of wonder how we got home, because we were most of the drive mindless. We really weren't paying attention. We were sort of on autopilot. And so part of the search for novelty is to help make our automatic behavior less automatic. And probably really one of the hallmarks of her conceptualization of mindfulness is that mindfulness really will only occur when we try to reduce our tendency to make evaluations of external events. And if we can make sort of fewer unnecessary judgments, even sometimes unnecessary positive judgments, that's really going to be when we experience the most amount of mindfulness. And this is a really good point to sort of break off from and go to some of the other types of definitions of mindfulness, because what Langer says is that really we want to engage less frequently in evaluations of sort of ourselves and others and situations. And this really sort of brings together this more two-component model of mindfulness. In this sort of model, we really have these two components. One is this sustained practice of attention, where we really stop losing process as to what we're focusing in on, and we regulate our own current personal experiences, so that we have attention on sort of one present moment. So we have to have sort of self-regulation of our intention. But we also have to have an emotional openness, and this emotional openness is again a little bit what Langer was talking about, gives us this sort of acceptance and appreciation of really what's going on in our lives, our sort of internal experience. And so going back to this definition of mindfulness, this is the non-judgmental part. So there's attentional part and there's this non-judgmental part. And this will be looking at whatever comes into your frame of reference or sort of into your awareness, not with judgment, not with beating yourself up, but really with this sort of open curiosity and sort of acceptance and appreciation of all internal experiences. And that's really an important part of this two-component system of mindfulness, this openness, this emotional openness, which facilitates this appreciation of internal experiences. We're going to sort of shift into mindful meditation. We'll actually get into this a little bit more in the second lecture. We're a little top-heavy in these two back-to-back lectures, and that we're spending a little bit more time on mindfulness than we are on other parts. And so one of the things that we're going to look at is if you understand these sort of benefits of mindfulness, then how do you cultivate it? And mindfulness meditation has really been cultivated to help us manage these stressful sorts of situations. So one of the important concept of mindfulness meditations is it's supposed to make our mind more receptive to our current situation and to our current internal states, but again, helping us to be learning how to be less judgmental of those types of states. So being more mindful of our emotions, being more mindful of our eating, or even sort of mundane types of activities. You can even see sort of breathing instruction exercises will help us become aware sort of what's going on with our bodies, and ultimately will help us become aware in a way that is non-judgmental.